All right, let's get to the news. Now to the latest in the disappearance of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. President Trump spoke with Saudi King Salman yesterday and later offered up this explanation to reporters.
I just spoke with the King of Saudi Arabia, who denies any knowledge of what took place with regard to, as he said, his Saudi Arabian citizen. We are going to leave nothing uncovered. With that being said, the king firmly denied any knowledge of it. He didn't really know. Maybe, I don't want to get into his mind, but it sounded to me like maybe these could have been rogue killers. Who knows?
When he told you that, you trust him, you believe him?
All I can do is report what he told me, and he told me in a very firm way that they had no knowledge of it. He said it very strongly. His denial to me could not have been stronger, that he had no knowledge, and it sounded like he and also the Crown Prince had no knowledge. It wasn't like there was a question in his mind. The denial was very, very strong.
Gee,
maybe rogue. I mean, Willie Geist, maybe rogue killers. This is along the lines of Ted Cruz's father killing JFK. I mean, by the way, I didn't see the rest of that press conference. Did he blame Ted Cruz's father for killing Khashoggi?
Not this time.
I don't know.
Not this time. I mean, but seriously, so he plants a conspiracy theory that the Saudis go, oh, that sounds pretty good. Yeah, we'll start saying that publicly.
Yeah, so he says rogue killers, and then just hours after that, NBC reported that Saudi Arabia's government is discussing a plan to admit Khashoggi was killed after entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, according to 3 people with knowledge of the situation. 2 of those people also tell NBC News the Saudis are putting together an explanation that would absolve Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of responsibility by giving him plausible deniability to say he did not order or know about the killing, with one of those people in the report adding he was told by those close to Saudi leadership that the kingdom will claim that, quote, rogue operatives killed Khashoggi during an interrogation or rendition attempt that went awry, seemingly echoing what President Trump said there about rogue killers. NBC's reporting advances earlier reports that the Saudis will claim Khashoggi was killed in an interrogation gone wrong, and President Trump was asked about that yesterday as well.
There's a report that the Saudis might say that Khashoggi was killed during the unauthorized interrogation. Does that sound
I just saw that. I just don't know. I'm going to have to see what they say. And we're working very close with Saudi Arabia and with Turkey, and they're working together to figure out what happened. And they want to know what happened also. So a lot of people are working on it, Steve, a lot of people. And we'll be bound very much by that. We'll see. I heard that report, but nobody knows if it's an official report. So far, it's just the rumor of a report coming out.
Meanwhile, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo arrived in Riyadh earlier this morning for a face-to-face meeting with King Salman. Trump says he instructed Pompeo to go on the trip, quote, to find out what happened, firsthand what they know, what's going on. We're joined this morning also by Gene Robinson and Heidi Prisbilla. Gene, let me ask you about this. I'm interested in the role that Jared Kushner played in all this. We know he's very close to Mohammed bin Salman, to the Crown Prince. I want to know how much he discussed with bin Salman, and if together perhaps they cooked up this idea that it was rogue killers who killed Khashoggi, if in fact he was killed.
Yeah, I want to know too, Willie. And funny thing, we haven't heard a peep from Jared Kushner, who's perhaps the person in the administration with the most direct line to Mohammed bin Salman, and the person who maybe could get some answers, but we haven't heard any answers there. Look, this rogue killers explanation, and I don't know, it's ridiculous that this has to be said, but this is absurd. This is absurd. A team of 15 guys equipped with a bone saw show up in Istanbul for this interrogation, and that's some sort of rogue operation. It seems very clear from what we know, or what we think we know, that this was a pretty elaborate plan that had to be authorized, and everything we know about Mohammed bin Salman and the way he operates doesn't just suggest, it says that nothing like this would have happened without his direct approval. So this, but it sounds like this is the cover story, and I think the president gave us a preview. Maybe he got a hint from the king, but I think he gave us a preview of what the story is going to be later today.
And Joe, think about what the Saudis are saying. If in fact they're going with this rogue operatives, rogue killers explanation, they're saying all we intended to do was to abduct, torture, and interrogate this journalist. We just didn't mean to kill him.
Yeah, that's supposed to be the great news, that we were just going to lure Khashoggi in. And then, yeah, you're right, exactly. We're going to interrogate him and then take him back to Saudi Arabia and imprison him. But right now, the Saudis and Donald Trump find themselves in a position where they're desperate to keep investment going into Saudi Arabia. Donald Trump is desperate to do whatever he can to basically play PR man for the Saudis, just like he wanted to play PR man for Vladimir Putin. And he continues, again, started on this show in 2015, started on this show back in December of 2015, apologizing, Mike Barnicle, for Vladimir Putin being a murderer of journalists and being a murderer of political adversaries. So, I mean, I'm sorry, there is no other explanation than Donald Trump makes a lot of money, as he bragged to people during the campaign. He makes a lot of money from the Saudis, and he doesn't want to upset them. Just like the Russians poured a lot of money into Donald Trump and the Trump Organization's coffers over the past decade or so. They don't want to offend it. This isn't about foreign policy. This isn't about diplomacy. This isn't about human rights. This is about Trump Organization money.
Well, Joe, the outlines of this story are pretty simple, and they're very familiar. The language is very simple and very familiar. It's outlined. You just outlined it. It's similar to his reaction to Putin. This story also has to do with the $110 billion arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Clearly, more of a priority to the President of the United States than the national integrity of the United States foreign policy. Mike Pompeo, he's in Saudi Arabia today. He's going to meet with King Salman and with his son, the Crown Prince, MBS. And here's what he's going to do. This is an age-old story. He's there to make their story a bit better for when it finally comes out, probably later today, from the kingdom. And it will be, as you've outlined, as Willie just outlined, it's going to be a rendition gone awry, that you know, they ended up killing the guy. And they're going to get away with it, too. They are going to get away with it.
Yeah, the question is, Heidi, what happens on the Hill? We've heard Rand Paul and some others who usually are obsequious to Donald Trump and kowtow to him, actually being Lindsey Graham of late, actually being very critical of the Saudis. Are there enough Republicans to cross the president when you have Saudi leaders who are murdering Washington Post journalists?
You would think that this would be the red line. We thought that the red line might have been the tariffs. But in this case, yes, Lindsey Graham and several other Republicans were strong in saying that the repercussions had to be severe. However, Joe, it was within moments after that that the president really allowed MBS and the Saudis to have this plausible deniability, undercutting their own Secretary of State's ability to go over there and be effective in his meeting as well. Like you said earlier, the only realistic outcome now would be that Pompeo is put in a position of having to rubber stamp whatever the Saudis' explanation here is, that this was some kind of an interrogation, which, by the way, we all pointed this out before, but who goes to an interrogation with a bone saw? But that this was some kind of an interrogation that the Saudis had no idea was going to lead to these consequences and a killing. And so the implications are really, really significant because we've talked from the beginning of this presidency, Joe, about the potential impact on human rights worldwide. Well, that begins with journalists. I remember vividly a train trip up on the Acela when I talked to a group for an international group to protect journalists, who told me it was within months of Trump taking office that they saw the worldwide threats to journalists going up. And this is kind of the in the extreme what is happening now in terms of human rights, not only to journalists, but in several hot spots around the world.
Well, and look at the very places, Mika, that Donald Trump calls leaders friends. Vladimir Putin in Russia.
Incredible.
Journalists are murdered there all the time. Opposition leaders are murdered there all the time. You look what's obviously happening in Saudi Arabia, what happens in the Philippines. Other people mockingly and well, actually not even mockingly calling journalists enemy of the people, but actually starting to parrot Donald Trump's language. Even Assad in Syria now starting to parrot Trump's language, enemy of the people. Of course, Trump is parroting Stalin's language
looking
whenever
at potentially a dead journalist
when he does that. And here we have Turkey trying to be the good guy, being the white hat here. And yet, Mika, more journalists last year were either killed or imprisoned or persecuted in Turkey than any country in the world. So it is getting more dangerous by the day for journalists across the world. And now, apparently, even journalists who work for the Washington Post now have to worry about governments like Saudi Arabia abducting them, killing them, and cutting them up with bone saws.
Look, this is vintage Trump, sowing doubt, propping up dictators and people who are cruel, people who are clearly on the side of wrong. Look at him in the face of this, in the face of these accusations, which every day point more toward exactly what happened. And he's sowing doubt and protecting them and saying maybe it could have been this, or maybe it could have been that. He is showing extreme naivete on the world stage. It hurts America, and it certainly makes him look like a weak leader.
Not just that, he does look so weak.
So weak,
and
it's
so
painful.
pathetic. And just like he did in Helsinki, here's a guy who just
a bumbling idiot.
You have a guy who is scared of KGB agents, not man enough to stand up to former KGB agents, and not man enough to stand up to Saudi sheiks. I mean, that's what we have in a president.
Whatever they have on him better be worth it, because he looks like a bumbling idiot.
It's just money, I guess, though. I mean, is this what Donald Trump promised people? I thought he was going to be a strong leader. Instead, he's kowtowing
Feckless.
and letting these people, letting these autocrats, letting these tyrants kill journalists in the light of day.
That's not who we are. Still ahead on Morning Joe, Donald Trump books a decidedly smaller venue for his co-appearance with Ted Cruz.
No, I got to correct you there. Fake news. Donald Trump this summer said he was going to find the largest arena in the state of Texas, sell it out, and campaign for Ted Cruz, the same man who he believes his father killed JFK. But that's what he promised this summer. So I'm sure. Willie, what is it? Is it Cowboys Stadium? Is it Texas A&M?
Jerry Jones.
It's got to be, or maybe at UT.
It's got to be Jerry Jones Temple. Maybe the Aggies. They're in a stadium that holds like 102, 103,000.
Right. Yeah, that might be it.
It may be that, man. The 12th man. It's going to be amazing. Cruz and Trump going to go out on the field. The 12th man going to be going crazy. 102,000 Texans with Whataburgers in the right hand, screaming.
Crickets.
Screaming for the Hell, I got to book me a ticket to College Station, Mika. This is exciting.
We're going to talk about the optics of that and that memorable political ad.
Wait, Mika.
On behalf,
Mika.
Yes, breaking news. Yeah,
I'm just hearing now from our College Station dispatch. He's not going to be going there.
No.
What?
No.
Okay, it appears he's going to be about 93,000 short.
Yeah, well, there's that.
Of 102,000.
All right, so we're going to get to that great ad, by the way, about the burgers.
Whataburger ad.
But first, Bill Cairns with.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.